Tonight, there is a major manhunt akin to what you might expect in a very, very serious criminal investigation for a group of children or young people who are accused of racially abusing somebody on the Elizabeth line on the way in between Paddington and Maidenhead. Now, this video is not to endorse racist behaviour, nor is it to defend the children and young people responsible. It is to tell you, though, that there must be balance, particularly when you're talking to young people who cannot be expected to have the same level of competence as an adult when we are talking about getting them, prosecuting them and throwing them in jail when they may only be 13 or 14 years old in a country where if they were to commit very serious crime at that age, they would almost certainly walk free. This is a video about two-tier justice. It doesn't condone anything that anybody has done. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Please do subscribe. 65% of you are not subscribed, and if you do that, we'll get to 150,000 very quickly, and we'll get to 200,000 subscribers. Really helps. Just get on and do it, but always remember, the only way to guarantee you get my videos is to press the bell notification icon. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about this story. The police now have launched a manhunt for a group of young people who left Sophia Chowdhury shaken and heartbroken after using the P word at her. So they called her E, and she was very upset. And I completely understand that, and I genuinely believe that these young people should be called to account for what they've done. However, what you have to remember is giving people a criminal record can have serious implications for their future. Just arresting somebody can have serious implications. I'll give you one obvious example. In the United States of America, you are no longer entitled to visa-free travel if you've ever been arrested. Now, I admit that most people won't declare it when they get to the border in America, but if you don't declare it, you're committing an immigration offence. And if the Americans later find out, then you'll be in real trouble. Now, obviously, I think it's obvious to say, and everybody would know, that if you've been sent to juvenile detention or indeed to prison, that has serious implications. The quality of education is incredibly low, and most people who end up in juvenile detention end up in a life of crime, which is why we try to avoid sending so many children to there. But of course, that may well be the fate of these children. Mrs. Chowdhury, 47, posts a video of an incident online on TikTok. The entrepreneur said she hadn't heard the term directed at anyone for 25 years. Upon realising she was filming, the children tried to cover their faces, and other passengers criticised her for filming. One passenger said, "So what?" after she explained she'd been racially abused. Ms. Chowdhury said after calling the police, she activated the passenger alarm to try and stop the youngsters from fleeing. She said, I quote, "I was shocked and angry about the children's reaction, but the adults' reaction are what broke me and brought me to tears. Despite reporting the incident and being told she would wait for the police, she was not met by the BTP at the time, but obviously once she was in Slough, they took further action." I'm in a very difficult position, and I imagine you're in a very difficult position hearing a story like this, because I honestly believe, you know, the police knocking on the door of the parents and saying, "Hey, you know, what took place on the train was wholly unacceptable. You're going to have a word with this child." I believe that that is appropriate. Even going to the school and saying, right, you know, put them in detention for the next 10 weeks or whatever, and indeed ensure that teachers are aware of the fact that they're behaving wholly inappropriately on a train. What I don't want to see is the criminal justice system get involved. I know hurty words are hurty, and I do accept that. And, you know, I'd be appalled if one of my friends who was of Indian descent was called a P. But at the same time, you've got to remember that young people don't understand the consequence of their actions all the time, which is why there's things like sentencing as young offenders, why there's different systems. You can't expect a 15-year-old to understand their duty and cultural norms in the same way that I would at my age. And I would expect that if I ever did that, abused somebody on a train in that way, you know, I would expect to be the victim of criminal justice, or rather subject to criminal justice. I don't believe that you have the right to say absolutely anything. When I support the Free Speech Union, my view is that there are two types of speech. there's free speech, and then there's illegal conduct. So as an example, if you incite somebody towards hatred, then that is something that ought to be looked at. Similarly, if what your speech is planning a burglary, as an example, then that is not free speech, is it? That's commissioning of a crime. And I think we need to draw that very clear delineation. Equally, there's clearly a public order issue, isn't there, where somebody's screaming abuse at somebody on the train, whatever it is that they're saying. And I have to say to you, one of the things that I've found on the public transport network, people who are drunk or on drugs, these children weren't, can be particularly intimidating, even if they do nothing at all, because you don't know how volatile they are and how subject they are to change. But we've got to have balance and we've got to have fairness. And I think this video is very much about that. I think what we do is we have to empower parents and we have to support teachers in looking at the behaviour of children. Obviously, there is another issue for these white young people. They will have seen themselves at school being racially discriminated against on the grounds of the colour of their skin. They will be aware that they are second-class citizens in their own country, only ever so slightly, but they are slightly second-class citizens because of their right to access university will be diminished on the grounds of the colour of their skin. They will also face discrimination in the workplace, and already their history and their culture will have been traduced in school. They will be required by the education system to admit that white people are bad and they were born with an original sin, and that original sin was slavery and colonialism. It is the duty of every white child to be punished for that, is the view, of course, of this country. And so they're going to rail against it. And I will say, a multicultural society does lead to racial tensions. There can be no racial tensions if there's no multiculturalism. It's just an obvious thing to say. And so I think we have to expect it. And I suppose where I come to at the end of this video is very simply this. You know, people are going to react when they are provoked. And I think that feeling angry at being racially abused is something that both Ms. Chowdhury and indeed the children who did this are both victims of in so many respects. And so please, 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 British Transport Police, do not arrest these children. Do not properly investigate them. I think this must be a matter for the parents. It must be a matter for the school, because there was a video on this channel. I'll say this is the final point because I'm running out of time. I put out a video the other day, which you can find on the channel, which talks about the fact that Rupert Lowe had identified that 10,000 internships in law were going to black people, black young people, and whites need not apply. This is on the back of the number of scholarships that are given on the grounds the colour of the skin, of people's skin, has increased massively in Oxford and Cambridge University. You know, we now look at how much less likely white working class boys are to go to top universities than, say, Asian young people. That is a function of Britain being a racist society, and it's something that we really need to end. And I think if there is a great takeaway from this instance, it must be that everybody ought to be treated equally in a fair society, and that will make racism less likely, because a lot of racism, not all, a lot of racism comes out of a sense of unfairness and a sense of frustration. Until next time, goodbye.